Hello, Salt Lake City. Welcome to Talk with Ted, number 25. Can we trust Dave with our big money? Originally, I had posted on LinkedIn, can we trust Dave with our treasure? Because I've got Utah State Treasurer David Damschen. Did I say that right?
You did.
And I'm going to call you Dave. How are you, Dave?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. I'm doing well. I'm a little worked up today because I was running late, busy this morning on a case that settled up just in time for me to get here. So it's been a little bit of a race to the studio.
Successful outcome, hopefully.
It was. We settled the case, a hotly debated case with the mayor of Draper City, Troy Walker is his name, and we were down at his office. And we had a great mediator, a gentleman by the name of Nate Alder from the law firm of Snow Christensen. I'm sorry, I'm getting my law firms mixed up, from Christensen and Jensen. And Alan, you know, that's the same firm that Todd Weiler's at now.
Yeah.
A lot of great lawyers at Christensen and Jensen. I know that they follow me on LinkedIn, a few of them, and I appreciate their support. And so Nate, mediator there, brought together some people that were involved in a real estate deal that had gone sour a number of years ago, and they were quite polarized by their different perspectives of the case, and Nate did a really skillful job to bring us together, and so I'm delighted to have that case behind me. So you can understand.
So you celebrate by coming here and
going
to work,
escaping from the law. But I told you, Dave, I'm going to hold you in abeyance a little bit, like I do with most of my guests. So I want to introduce you, and then I'm going to promote myself a little bit and talk about a little bit of rock and roll and a couple of other things. But I just want to read from the state website. Dave Damschen was appointed state treasurer December 11th, 2015. As state treasurer, he is responsible for the treasury and cash management functions of the state, the investment of public funds, including the $11 billion Public Treasures Investment Fund, the issuance of all general obligation and lease revenue bonds authorized by the state legislature, and the administration of the Unclaimed Property Division. And so, Dave, you've been here about 10 minutes and you haven't given me anything yet. I was hoping you'd find some of my property. No?
We can work on that.
We're going to have to work on that. But that's who I've got on today. And like I said, I'm going to put you on hold here for the first segment, but then we're going to come in and we're going to talk about Social Security, managing public funds, the role of the treasurer, a quasi-political position. We vote for the treasurer at election time. You'll tell us about that. And I think a lot of people don't really understand exactly what it is that the treasurer does. So that's what you're here to tell us, Dave. Meanwhile, again, my name's Ted McBride. I got my buddy Alan Anderson here, my sound man. Hopefully we're off to an okay start with the technology. I'm looking at it. Looks like we're okay. And we've had a few interesting shows lately. This is number 25, and hopefully soon I'm going to have some of the episodes up on YouTube and a bit of a YouTube channel, and we'll try to make a little more out of the show. But I want to thank Dick Perry, the owner of this station, for giving me the opportunity to ramble on here on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I've had great fun. And last week, I did two shows, one with Sky Lazaro, a superb lawyer here in town, about the Unabomber Manifesto and about psychological insecurity in the modern world. And if you missed that episode, you can go to the K-Talk Media site and see it or download it. It's on LinkedIn, Facebook. But there were some interesting insights in the Unabomber Manifesto that related to human beings' psychological security. And Ted Kaczynski, the mass murderer, who I called a gentleman during the show, I went back and listened to, I called the guy a gentleman, so that was a mistake. He was no gentleman, he was a murderer. But he, in his essay, identified what he thought were some underlying reasons for psychological insecurity in the modern world. And he claimed and made a case for the fact that more primitive people had greater psychological security. And this is going to segue into Social Security and our treasurer, who's sitting to my left. Because Ted Kaczynski believed that the modern world and the modern problems that we face, that the human being couldn't immediately address the problems that they face, the wild animal, the lack of food, you could do something about it in a more primitive existence. But now we're faced with threats of nuclear disaster, of financial meltdown, and of things that we can't control. And he also made a case that technology and industrialization made it almost too easy to work and to gain those necessities of life, to have that power and control to provide for your own security and existence. And he thought another important component of that was autonomy, to be able to do it somewhat by yourself. And of course, we really don't have that opportunity in the modern world. We are dependent upon systems, and I know everyone has great insecurity about financial needs, especially as medicine enables us to live longer and more people are on, I think, state pension funds and retirement funds that are retired. We're going to talk about that. And I've got a philosophy, Dave, about Social Security, that the federal government can never come out and say that Social Security is in great shape because they don't want people to rely exclusively on it. We need to create incentives that people save and provide for themselves. And so I believe that as a matter of like political philosophy, the government can't come out and say that Social Security is in great shape because it needs us to be motivated otherwise to not rely on Social Security exclusively. And I'm going to raise this issue again as we get going here. But it's going to be a good show. It's going to be a good show. And I've got a commitment from another guest. I've got a cousin that's a world famous magician, and his name is Jeff McBride. And he runs the premier magic school in the world down in Las Vegas. He's currently in the Philippines. And he's an amazing guy, and he's a very spiritual guy, and he's a leader of a neo-pagan group. And I talk about symbolism on my show, Dave, and I'm a heavy metal fan, and we're going to talk a little bit of music. But I think that there's a lot of salvation in heavy metal music, and that even in Ozzy Osbourne music and Black Sabbath, that it's not as it is portrayed. And my cousin that'll be coming on, he is a master of sort of the black arts, right? He's a magician, and he is truly just that. He's always been a magician. It's the only job he's ever had. And he's a leader of a pagan movement, and it's really, paganism has sort of a negative connotation, and it can have a couple of different meanings. And I've done shows about symbolism and philosophy and how there's sort of two things in everything. And I have a definition here from vocabulary.com of pagan, and there's two interesting definitions, because I think listeners will think, well, pagan, that's kind of evil and someone that maybe overconsumes, and but there's two meanings. The first, a person who follows a polytheistic or pre-Christian religion, not a Christian or Muslim or Jew. So a pre-Christian religion, someone that was said to sort of worship the stars and the planets, etc. The other definition for it is quite different, and it's someone motivated by desires for sensual pleasures. And I just find that really fascinating, that those two definitions really have nothing to do with one another. And I think that the someone motivated by desires for sensual pleasures is sort of the modern use of that term pagan. But I can tell you that my cousin Jeffrey is more into the pre-formally established religions of the earth and the more historic practice of paganism, or a person who follows a belief. He's a very spiritual person, and he's going to be great to have on, and we're going to turn his magic show into a radio show. So that's going to be my challenge. We are on Facebook, but for those people in the car, I'll be mindful of the fact that we're on the radio. One thing, I'm a big heavy metal fan. I love the band Black Sabbath, Ozzy Osbourne. I once bumped into Ozzy Osbourne skiing at the Canyons Resort. I saw Ozzy at the Canyons.
Oh, that's great.
And the number 666 has a couple of different meanings. And I think in our culture today, it's associated with, the number of the devil. And there are people that Ronald Reagan actually changed his address in Santa Barbara, California, because it had 666 in it back in the 80s. And in China, it's a good luck number, 666. And it's also an interesting number on a couple of numerical fronts. If you add together the numbers 1 through 34, it equals 666. So if you take those sequentially, it adds up to 666. I think it's 34. Could be 36. 36. Also in Roman numerology, you've got X is 1,000, L is 500, C is 100, and now I'm missing them. But then you go 10, 5, 1. And if you take the Roman numerals under 1,000 and add them up, it's 500, 100, 50, 10, 5, 1, and that equals 666. And there's also other mathematical calculations, et cetera, that you can do on timesing certain numbers, factors and squares that are beyond my understanding. But there's other ways to arrange numbers in math that also turn out to that number 666. And again, like I said, in Chinese symbolism, it's a good number, like we have here, 777, right? If you go to Vegas and you hit straight sevens. So I guess the slot machines in China would be 666. But I raise that as just another example of kind of symbolism, and that things aren't always what they appear to be, and that we often want to attribute just one meaning to something when there can be multiple, or also changing definitions of things over time, because there's some debate among biblical scholars even whether that 666 does in fact signify the devil. There's some debate over that. So, but I'm fascinated with heavy metal, and I love the band Rush. And I thought for this show, I did a little ad on LinkedIn where I quoted some Rush lyrics in the song Big Money. And it's from basically when I was in high school, or maybe just out of high school, from the album Signals, I think it was off. And I love the band Rush. Three guys from Canada, or two of them are from Toronto, Canada, whose parents were Holocaust survivors. And the third, a drummer, Neil Peart, the philosopher drummer. And he writes all the lyrics. And I had quoted the first verse in my LinkedIn ad, and I'll quote the last verse here, because then we're going to talk about the big money in Utah and the great wealth that we have in this state. And the man sitting to my left here is helping manage a large part of it. So to quote Neil Peart through the mouth of Geddy Lee, through the mouth of Ted McBride, I'm sorry, inspired by through the mouth of Geddy Lee. Big money goes around the world. Big money give and take. Big money done a power of good. Big money make mistakes. Big money got a heavy hand. Big money take control. Big money got a mean streak. Big money got no soul. Now, I've been doing a radio show. Are we okay, Alan, with the commercial coming up? I've been doing the radio show on my own now for 4 or 5 months and becoming more comfortable doing it. But when I get real comfortable, I'm going to start singing the Rush lyrics, Dave. Maybe that's when we'll get the people to really tune out. But I've been inspired by Geddy Lee and Rush. And when I went off to college, I was a middle-class kid that went to Skidmore College, a private school in Saratoga Springs, New York, that had a lot of rich kids at it. And it made some impressions on me, on my philosophies about money and about big money. And so stay tuned. You'll hear a few of those. And congratulations to the Utah Jazz for winning last night. Talk with Ted. I'll be right back. Welcome back to Talk with Ted, a show about nothing, a little play on the Seinfeld show. And I hope that I haven't caused Dick Perry a heart attack if he's listening, because on his precious and beloved K-Talk radio, I'm talking about Black Sabbath and paganism and the number 666. But I've got some good company to share some metal roots with. Dave Damshin, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
And you tell me that I was in error about the album on that I cited as being on the Big Money.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. I can stand corrected.
I don't even know for sure what album that was on, but I mentioned that I saw Rush on the Moving Pictures tour. I think I caught them on the Signals tour, and that was the next to last time I saw them, and that was the last album I really paid close attention to.
And what year was that?
83, maybe?
What year did you graduate high school, Dave?
82.
82. So you got me by a few years. So you're about 55 years old?
54.
54, okay. I'm 52, class of 85. So when I was a freshman in high school, the Moving Pictures album, Tom Sawyer and Red Barchetta and Vital Signs, The Camera Eye.
Oh, my gosh.
I still listen to it today.
Witch Hunt.
Wonderful song. Now, Dave, if you were on a stranded island and had only one album to listen to for the rest of your life, I know you're 55, you don't have too many years to go, but You look older than me, Dave. I'm sorry.
Handel's Messiah.
And what is that? I'm not familiar with that one.
Oh, it's a what do you call it? It's orchestral. It's a choral piece.
Okay.
It's Christmas music.
Well, I hope my island is close enough to yours where I can hear it, because I'll be playing Hemispheres from Brush. That's what
that's a great album. Oh my gosh. Yeah, we were talking earlier. Their older albums were phenomenal, and then like a lot of bands, we were talking about U2. In later years, you have to really pick through a lot of very average music to find some hidden gems, but the earlier stuff was all so good.
Yeah, I've got a theory. Every band has got a limited amount of creativity. Even Led Zeppelin, as great as they were, their albums toward the end were terrible. In Through the Outdoor, ooh, I hate that song. Or In the Evening is what I hate. In the Evening.
Really? I like that.
Oh, I can't stand that song.
Oh, yeah.
Just to me, it's the death of Led Zeppelin.
Yeah. What about the Beatles?
Now, the Beatles were so unique that they were cranked out so much great music for so long.
They never ran out of creativity.
Yeah, I think the Violent Femmes were a little bit the same. Or not the Violent Femmes, Lou Reed's band. What am I thinking of? Back in the late 60s, early 70s. It'll come to me. But awesome, talking rock and roll on 1640 K-Talk. Dave, why don't you introduce yourself?
David Damshin, huge Rush fan. What else do you need to know?
That's all I need to know. And a skier.
Yeah. Well, I'm on the ski patrol. I don't know what kind of a skier I am.
Are you a pagan?
You have to definitely not a pagan.
Okay.
You have to know how to get somebody who's busted up down the hill safely, but you don't have to look pretty doing it, right? So
yeah, good for you. And you do that up at Powder Mountain now?
Powder Mountain, yeah, 14 or 15 years now.
We can talk about that a little bit. First, we live in a really rich state, don't we?
Well, yes, it depends on how you look at it, but yes.
I look
generally
at it from the perspective of the natural resources that we're able to tap in this place.
Well, undoubtedly, from that standpoint, it doesn't get any better. We have 5 national parks, more than any other state. And I tell people I only have one complaint about Utah. Having lived in San Francisco and Seattle and living in Central Washington, where I had ready access to the Oregon coast, my only complaint, we're too far away from the ocean.
You're an ocean guy.
I know you can hop on a plane or whatever, but I love being somewhere where you can get to the ocean as quickly as we can get to the mountains. So if we could have it all, we'd be next to an ocean somehow.
I grew up in New York, and I've got a great friend, Brad Combe. Shout out to Craig Burmacombe, who grew up in Rhode Island, and he lives now in Maine and runs a boatyard in Maine. But I've done some sailing around Martha's Vineyard and around Cape Cod. Are you a sailor or boater, surfer? What is it that draws you to the ocean?
Well, so I served 4 years in the Coast Guard. And I was a quartermaster, which is a navigational rating. So I was up on the bridge and navigating. And I had friends that knew how to sail, so we would go sailing in San Francisco Bay. I didn't do enough of it to say that I'm a competent sailor. The first time I actually tried sailing was with a young lady. We were at a Christian camp called Malibu up in British Columbia, and I didn't know how to sail at all. So we basically ran downwind and then had to have somebody come tow us back.
Tow you back?
Yeah.
Sounds like my life.
It was utter failure.
That's amazing. I had an amazing trip just before I went into law school with the same friend that I talked about. He was taking care of a very wealthy man's boat, took it south for the winter, and coming back up, I met him in Bermuda and sailed from Bermuda to Rhode Island. 5 days at sea.
Oh, my.
Yeah, it was really quite something.
How were the conditions?
The conditions weren't great for sailing. We were going through the Gulf Stream, and we ended up having to power most of the way. And on our first day off of Bermuda, we actually got a freight shipping line that was floating out there in the ocean, stuck in the prop. And luckily, there were 5 of us, two young guys that knew how to sail, a very old seasoned sailor with us, and then a hack like me and another friend that was also a hack. But we had no wind. We got this thing caught in our prop. They immediately killed the engine, so it didn't destroy the engine. But we floated all night long, stuck out in the ocean. And the next day, one guy who was an airplane mechanic went down into the water, was able to take this, must have been 20 feet, 25 feet long, a big shipping line that had barnacles growing on it. And he tied it up to the mast and was able to put enough tension on it that he dove back down with a bread knife and cut it off with a bread knife.
Oh, my
At
goodness.
about 11 o'clock the next morning, and off we went.
That was Herculean.
Yeah, and
That's
the night
amazing.
before we'd been broken down. We'll get back to you in a minute, Dave. But we had been
This is a great story.
we'd been broke. We were broke down. We were broke down at sea on a 65-foot yacht, and there was a ship coming right at us, and the sun was starting to set. And from the time we saw it until the time it got to us was about an hour. And by the time it got to us, it was nearly virtually dark. And we flashed at the light, and it flashed us and was asking if we were okay, etc. And it was the QE2. The Queen Elizabeth II, a giant cruise ship, and the light bulbs were going off left, right, and center, taking pictures of us out floating at sea. And I don't know, maybe the captain indicated that there was his boat in distress, but it was coming right at us for about an hour.
That's pretty threatening.
Yeah, and and we had a gun on board, fearful of pirates.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We used the gun to shoot boxes of Cracker Jacks that we had. We threw them out, and boom! So we were young and stupid. But we're going to be getting into your Coast Guard stuff.
That's great. Well, your harrowing trip makes me think of the very first time I went to sea in the Coast Guard. I was stationed on a cutter in Kodiak, Alaska, and we were headed down to Pearl Harbor for training for several weeks. So I was at Kodiak for maybe a couple of days before we got underway. Took us 10 days to cross the Gulf of Alaska and the Northern Pacific in a ship that went about 12 knots. And we hit 35-foot seas on the way down there. And I was thinking, what on earth have I gotten myself into?
Wow.
And I never saw sea conditions that bad again in the entire 4 years that I served.
How old were you?
So it was kind of a
What years did you serve, I should say?
cold slap in the face. 83 to 87.
83 to 87.
Yeah.
Wow. That'll have some effect on you, huh? You watch
well,
these Alaskan fishing shows where the guys are putting their lives
A
at
little
risk?
bit, yeah. It was a great experience. When you're young and stupid, that's the time to do things like that.
Yeah.
And it was a great experience.
Wow, amazing. Where'd you grow up, Dave?
Boise, Idaho.
Boise, Idaho.
Went to high school in Yakima.
The Yakima, what's the team name?
Oh, well.
Were you a sports guy?
Well, there were a couple of high schools there. I went to Eisenhower. We were the Eisenhower Cadets.
Eisenhower Cadets.
Yeah. So I played basketball and football, ran track.
Okay.
And I had two not very lucrative opportunities to play college football, so I did not play college football.
Where were those up?
I was a 190-pound tight end.
That's bigger than I was.
So,
And
yeah.
of course, Boise State didn't have the football program back then that they have had in the last 20 years or
They
so.
didn't. I actually remember having a conversation with one of the players on the BSU team, and I was still playing around with the idea of maybe keeping it up and maybe walking on. And he just looked at me. He was a linebacker. He was this big, beefy dude. He just looked at me up and down. He said, "No,
Not going to happen.
Don't even bother." Yeah, I spent a lot of time in the weight room, and I got stronger, but I had a hard time putting muscle mass on.
What's the most you ever weighed back when you were in shape?
Yeah, like right around 200, just
Right
under
around
200.
200.
Yeah, and for a 6'3" tight end,
That's still
not
pretty
going to
thin.
cut it. Yeah,
That's still pretty
so
thin.
maybe I could have switched to wide receiver and
Yeah.
played at college, but
Where'd you go to college?
well, I went to Boise State for a year before I decided college wasn't really it for me at that moment in time. That's when I enlisted in the Coast Guard, and then after 4 years in the Coast Guard, I moved to Seattle, and I graduated from the University of Washington,
What year was that?
1990.
What'd you study there?
Finance.
Finance.
Yeah.
Okay. What ultimately brought you to Utah?
Well, I came out of college into a management development program with U.S. Bank, and they were based in Portland. So I was bouncing back and forth between Seattle and Portland in this training program for a couple of years, and worked for the bank for a number of years after that program. And job opportunity with the bank came up here in Utah to come into treasury management as the area of the banking industry that I walked into. And that was like 23 years ago. Been here
Okay,
ever
so
since.
you and I got here about the same time. I got here in 1997.
And did you come
into Utah.
directly from New York?
Came from New York. I worked in New York with my magician cousin's father for 5 years before heading out to Utah.
What was it that brought you to Utah?
Snow. Yeah, love
Yeah,
to
that
ski.
happens.
Yep, yep. And the Olympics, and the the economy, and even my uncle's advice. He used to say if he were to do it over again, he'd have ended up in Las Vegas or some Western city that was growing and developing, and I think we landed in a good one here in Salt Lake City because this place has changed dramatically from the time that you and I got here.
You know, one of the great lessons I learned while I was in the Coast Guard is a lot of the people that I served with that came from the East, once they came out west, I served on that one cutter in Kodiak, another cutter out of San Francisco. Most of the people that came west from the East didn't really want to go back that much.
Yeah, and it's wonderful back there too. And the East, the Northeast in particular, is so unique because you can get to so many places within just a few-hour drive. And here we're isolated or on an island here.
Well, it's interesting to me because I've lived here in the West for so long, and I love Utah. But I actually appreciate it back there. I don't know that I would live there, but whenever we do go out for business or occasional vacation trips, whatever, I love it back there. I love the architecture, the history. The history especially is phenomenal.
Yeah, I grew up in Revolutionary War area. I grew up right near West Point.
Oh my gosh.
About 20 miles from West Point. And there's a lot of history there.
I love
and there's a lot of history here in Utah. We've got 150 years since the Golden Spike went in, and there's going to be big celebrations this year up in Ogden and all over the state, and it's something to be proud of.
Oh yeah, I'm excited. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. Now, you heard my little spiel about financial security. I think a lot of people worry about their financial security, and a lot of people are dependent upon Social Security. Now, you don't have anything to do your job, or I should ask, not assume. As the state treasurer, you're managing the employee pension fund of former state employees or retired state employees?
Well, as state treasurer, I serve on 20 boards and commissions of the state, one of those being Utah Retirement Systems, which is a multi-system pension. You know, in a lot of states, you'll have multiple
you serve on
pensions.
20 boards.
20 boards and commissions, yeah. And so Utah Retirement Systems manages pensions for, basically all of the public plans in the state. Got different, school districts, state employees, cities, public safety. So, so I'm on the pension system board.
Okay. And what is the pension system board? Is that a corporate board? Is it a government position?
It's governmental.
Dumb that down a little bit for me.
Yeah, it's governmental, and I'm an ex officio member. So by virtue of my office, in statute, the state treasurer, whomever that might be, is on that board. And then there are the rest of the board. There are appointees. There are representatives on that board that represent public sector employees, and then there's a couple of seats on the board that are basically individuals experienced in institutional investments. So you have representation that with professional expertise. You have representation on the board that has an interest in. So we have a public school vice principal and also a state government employee.
Tell me again the name of this board, because there's 20 of them.
Utah Retirement Systems Board.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm glad you read the bio off my website, because it reminded me it's really outdated. And you mentioned the $11 billion.
That can happen fast.
Yeah, the investment pool that we run said in there $11 billion. It's $16 billion now.
It's only $3 billion, Dave. It went from 11 to 3. I was hoping you weren't going to say it went down. It went from 11 to 16.
16, yeah. And a lot of conservative taxpayers don't think that's a good thing. They're saying we've amassed $16 billion in public funds, and that's a lot of money that's in the pocket of governments. But that's pretty much every school district, every higher education institution, cities, counties, charter schools, irrigation districts, and so forth. So this is statewide, and they pretty much all have accounts with us. And because of the rates that pool earns, which is right now around 2.95%, you can't get anything like that in the banking system. And so
2.95%, so it's invested conservatively, but at a good interest rate?
It is, yeah.
Compared to commercially what's out there?
Yeah, because we're governmental, we don't charge, we charge a very thin slice to manage that, and it's managed prudently but expertly, and the rate of return is always very competitive and typically superior to what banks can pay on deposits, certainly. It's not a deposit product, it's an investment pool.
So how much of that $16 billion is invested in Bitcoin?
0.
Oh, come on, Dave. Let's roll the dice. Huh?
0
You jumped
and
today.
That'll never happen.
Never happened. And are there any public entities that you're aware of anywhere that have any public funds invested in Bitcoin?
No, the public funds generally, if they're operating funds per se, they're
There's
subject
gonna be
to
restrictions, regulations on it.
Yeah, we have state code. It's called the State Money Management Act, and it ensures that we're not putting taxpayer money into stocks and bonds and that kind of a thing. The exception is school foundations, public school foundations, our retirement system, and a few other portfolios where you have a longer time horizon where you can invest in stocks and bonds.
We're going to ask a few more details about that. On my way out, I've got an article here from the Deseret News, December 31st. Pension plans across the U.S. are failing. Here's why Utah doesn't have that problem. And I got him here to my left. We'll be right back.
Only one problem I have or question, Granger's got my back. Call clickgranger.com or stop by. Granger, for the ones who get it done.
Welcome back to Talk with Ted. It's 4:44 on Tuesday, April 23rd, 2019. And it is absolutely gorgeous out here in Utah. It's been raining the past few weeks, but we've got some sunshine now. And I've got with me the Utah State Treasurer, Dave Damschen, with me seated to my left. And before we get back to that discussion, Dave, I just want to share a couple of thoughts with you. I used to be very liberal when I was younger. Even when I went to law school, I was going to be an environmental lawyer, save the world. After being a litigator, trial lawyer for 25 years and working on two sides of cases and getting kicked in the teeth more than once for not seeing both sides, it's made me a bit of a moderate and a bit of a skeptic, that I like to think if I think I know the answer, I might stop thinking. And so I think that's part of why lawyering can be so exhausting, is that it's sort of a never-ending questioning yourself. But there's one truth. I don't think there's great moral high ground in litigation one way or the other. You know, some people like to think that they'll go to law school and take on some cause and be on that right side of some cause in perpetuity. And I don't really think that that's possible in litigation, nor is it the best role for a lawyer to play. But I do think that there's truth in economics. And I'm a expert cross-examiner because I can always trace the money. People are motivated by money. And we need to give incentives to people to do things, you know, so that they can go chase that money, and maybe even create disincentives in other areas. I mean, there are drug dealers and drug growers and producers because there's money in it. And if we could figure out a way to take the economic incentive out of it, maybe we could address some of those issues. I'm dealing with cases, and I'll be in court next week, and I can't wait to get there, against the state of Utah. And we'll be in federal court with the Attorney General, the state of Utah, and Sandy City, challenging Alan Anderson, who's sitting to my right here, operating sober living homes. And they're not wanted in many places here. And there's billboards on the road in Utah about Utah's blind to recovery and treatment and the drug addiction problems. And I think that it manifests itself in our housing policies. And there's actually regulations on the book where they want to disincentivize people like Alan Anderson, who want to operate sober living homes as a business and make money from it by providing housing. And the state of Utah actually has laws on the books interfering with that, and we're trying to overturn those laws.
That's cool.
But there's truth in money, and I think that rather than create an economic disincentive, there should be an economic incentive for operators of sober living homes and residential rehabs. And there needs to be some real awakening here in Utah, because this place buries its head in the sand when it comes to alcohol and drug addiction and recovery. And there's just too many people suffering, and there's too much of a need for facilities like the houses, many of which have been closed now, that Alan's tried to operate. So my show's about, sometimes it's about those types of things, recovery and psychology and mental health, because I think it's not spoken about enough. And a large part of that stress that people have in this modern world is financial health. And that's why you're here. Dr. Money. Dr. Dave. What were you doing today, Dave? Life of the Utah State Treasurer.
What was I doing today?
Yeah, before you came on here.
Well, it's an interesting day today. We met with some representatives for public employees asking about, there's something similar, you're going to be sorry you asked. There's something similar to pension that's called OPEB, if you've never heard of it, it's other post-employment benefits. And it has to do with, it was typical in the past for government employees to have post-retirement, maybe sick benefits, that kind of a thing, which sounds pretty rich, right?
Yeah.
Well, there was an accounting pronouncement that came out back around 2004 that said you need to recognize this. Historically, before that point, these things were handled just as pay-as-you-go expense items. But as you can imagine, with people living longer, it's the same dilemma with pensions, right? People living longer, healthcare costs going through the roof. It was recognized that these obligations, these promises that we're making to pay these benefits, post-retirement healthcare benefits, these are going to get really expensive in the long term, and they need to be actuarially recognized. And so Utah was the first state, to my knowledge, to respond appropriately to this pronouncement.
How is it different than health insurance?
Well, what it is it's the state government paying for your health insurance after you retire.
Okay.
It's almost like.
But don't many people have that? Is that what we're talking about? Don't many people have those benefits?
There were
if they work
people
for the
that
state?
had that pretty rich type of benefit up until this GASB 45 came out, and the state of Utah, this is kind of one of the reasons why we're so strong financially. We said, okay, we're going to create a trust fund, and we're going to start chunking money into that trust fund and letting the money grow and fund that obligation responsibly and not kick the can down the road. And we're going to stop those benefits prospectively. We'll respect those promises made to the employees that came on board during the time when those kinds of benefits were the norm. But we're going to stop offering those benefits going forward. And we're going to water things down and reduce our obligations correspondingly. And so we've been investing and building up this trust fund for years, and we're almost done with it at a time when a lot of states haven't even started dealing with it yet. So when you talk about this whole so-called pension crisis nationally, it's not just pensions, but it's also these other post-employment benefits like post-retirement health care. We've dealt with it.
Is that widely available now or no, post-retirement health care for government workers?
No, and I don't know nationally how many public employers have curtailed those benefits. I sure hope that most municipalities and jurisdictions have been going about the business of curtailing those, because just like pension obligations, they're with demographics, how long we're living and how expensive healthcare is getting, they're very expensive benefits to provide. And there are differences between public service and the private sector. So I don't know that we can ever make public compensation plans and benefits exactly like the private sector, but I come from the private sector, and we never had such benefits with my private employers.
And isn't sort of historically the trade-off is, okay, well, if you're working for the government, you may not make that big buck like out there in the free market capitalist system, but that you've got the security of those long-term benefits.
Right.
Are you saying that even that's changed now?
It is changing. But slowly. One of the problems we're seeing, though, is when retirement benefits for, say, firemen and law enforcement were reformed and curtailed back in 2012, I believe it was.
Which I think is wrong. I think those servants that especially give their body and risk their lives for us, I think that we should put them at the top of the list.
Well, and there was legislation this past year to sort of unreform some of those reforms and give back some of that. But this is one of the problems, is when those changes occurred, there were promises made, as I'm told. I wasn't around then. Or at least I wasn't in the discussion then, I should say. Certainly not as treasurer. There were promises made that, hey, we're reducing this retirement benefit, but we'll make up for it by paying you more. And the paying you more part didn't follow through. And that's the difficulty for policymakers and employers it's a lot easier to promise a future benefit that has to be delivered upon by future policymakers and future taxpayers. And that's one of the challenges with pensions, is you have to recognize it's a very long-term commitment, and if it's handled irresponsibly, it is a way of kicking the can down the road, kind of like what we've seen with Social Security.
Sure.
And now I'm going off on a tangent. You asked me what I did
No,
today.
you're okay. That was,
I had,
good. That was a good tangent. Could you just tell me what year was that GASB 45?
Oh, I want to say it was 2003 or 4 or somewhere around there.
So that was sort of a market change in what long-term medical benefits were available to the public.
It was
employees?
just an accounting pronouncement by GASB, the Governmental Accounting Standard Board. So it didn't have any real teeth, and this is why most governments ignored it. They looked at it and said, "Oh, that's a nice suggestion. Thanks for bringing it up."
But
And
Utah went with it.
Dave Clark, former Speaker of the House, he led the effort. And every time I go down to Washington County and talk to groups about our fiscal health, I try to make mention of the fact that he led out on that. And it's when I go talk to the rating agencies and we walk through all of these different factors of our fiscal strength as a state, we get to pension and OPEB. And the rating agencies are kind of like, get out of here. You guys are so together, so well-funded, so strong. You know, we're not perfect, but there's always room for improvement. But we're in, especially compared to other states, we're in incredibly good shape.
I always marveled. Now I forget the question I asked you that you didn't answer. Do you remember it?
Well, you asked about what I did today, and I had a meeting after. So we had this OPEB meeting with some representatives from public folks representing public employees, kind of wanting to know. They caught wind of the fact that we're about to pay off, if you will, these OPEB obligations within the next several years. And once those are paid off, that'll free up X $1 million that could be reallocated somewhere.
Settle the Mark Shurtleff case. Tongue in cheek.
I'm not sure that's what they had in mind, but
probably not.
I'll put in a good word for that.
There you go.
Sure.
But we have, you're talking about then what to do with some extra money once those obligations are satisfied.
I think that's what they're working on, and we were just providing them information on the current status of the OPEB plan.
I bet you that's not the same topic that they're discussing in the treasurer of the state of New York.
Probably not.
I've got to think that they're not similarly situated.
Probably not.
You know, I come from New York, and a lot of people there work for the government. It's a different type of place to manage because, of course, there's many more millions of people. There's much more infrastructure. There's rivers to cross and bridges to maintain. But a lot of people work for the government.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, there's a newspaper back home where I saw an article a couple of years ago that just struck me as odd, is that there are good paying jobs in the area. They're in the government. And back there, the tax rate is so high that people can't afford to live there after a while, especially if you're a state worker and you retire, you can't afford to live there. You've got to move. And I marvel at how cheap our property taxes are here in Utah. And when I say we live in a rich state, you know, we've got the natural resources, oil, gas, coal, uranium, copper, and it all gets taxed, and then you get to manage some of that money, right?
I thought you were going to say something about the champagne powder.
And the champagne powder. But it's in the slopes with the silicon in them, right? Now we're going after the silicon. I don't know what they're going to do with it.
That's right.
But we're really blessed to live in such a rich place.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, I tell you, the combination of our natural beauty, the mountains, the national parks, the beautiful desert terrain to the south, that combined, and I know a lot of people have frustrations about the state. They feel that we could have a lower tax burden, and we could have more conservative choices made by our legislature, and we could. But really, it's hard to find a better place, in my opinion. There's no place I'd rather be. And I think while we're not perfect, and like I said earlier, there's room for improvement, I think that we have a lot of very diligent people working together to try to, make those changes that are necessary to handle this incredible growth. The growth is good. It's a blessing and a curse, right?
It's explosive right now, isn't it?
Yeah.
The growth. I was at a meeting the other day with a group of homeowners over in West Jordan, and there's a proposed development near the Salt Lake Community College along Bangerter Highway. And of course, UDOT redid Bangerter, and that has restricted access and where you can add any additional ingress or egress, but there's still some land left, and they want to cram in some high-density retirement homes, and it's creating traffic problems. The problems come with the development for sure, and we got a lot of development going on right now.
Yeah, we stress our tax base. I think that our legislature has done a good job staying ahead of things in terms of transportation infrastructure, and they're very focused on that. They have been for quite some time. As you know, we have lots of kids, and we stress our education system and our education infrastructure as well.
We're going to talk when we come back. We're going into the top of the hour here, which is a little bit of a longer break, but when we come back, we're going to hear more about Dave Damshen's management of our state funds. And welcome back to Hour 2 of Talk with Ted, a show about nothing, number 25. Can we trust Dave with our big money? And if you're just joining us, I've got Utah State Treasurer Dave Damshen with me, and we've been talking about a little heavy metal to start the show, a little bit of Coast Guard, sailing, Utah in general. But I just want to give a little repeated pitch. Well, first, the Utah Jazz. Did you see the Jazz game last night, Dave?
I did not.
They won. It was a good game. Are you a Hoop fan?
Not too much.
Well,
Isn't that horrible?
The Jazz is the best show in town as far as sports go. It's our only professional sport, but they were down, 0-3, and they won a good one last night. And Quinn Snyder made some great adjustments. They looked like a team that might win 4 in a row.
I watch them from time to time. We had their owner, Gail Miller, at our Women's Financial Capability Conference yesterday.
Oh, terrific. Great lady.
Just being up on my feet all day at the conference, and I'm an old guy. So by the time I got home last night, I didn't have energy sufficient to watch a basketball game.
Is that right? Do you know Gail Miller?
I don't know her well. Yesterday was my first time meeting her. She's a really nice lady.
Well, if you bump into her again, put a word in for me. I'd love to interview her. I'd love her to be sitting in that chair. I think she's got a fascinating life, and to now be managing and running that great franchise is a great thing.
Since I met her yesterday, I can tell you she and I are just...
There you go, your old friend Gail.
But
I'm a huge Jazz fan. I'm linked in with a few people over there at the organization, and so I try to do my best to give a pitch to the Jazz, because I love basketball, and I love that we've got the NBA right here in town.
That's great. I think it's phenomenal for a city like Salt Lake to have the NBA. Just over the top.
I had a mentor growing up who's an assistant coach with the Indiana Pacers, a guy by the name of Bill Bano, and he's going to be on my program hopefully during the NBA playoffs here, so I'm going to have him on in a few weeks. Then I'm going to have my cousin Jeff McBride, world-famous magician, and he runs the greatest magic college in the world right out of his home in Las Vegas, and he's an interesting guy. He holds world records for the number of coins that he can run through his fingers in a 30-second amount of time. But he's masterful with cards and illusions, and he practices diligently every day. He compares it to a pianist, practicing the scales, and I think he's got a deck of cards in his hands, probably for 2 or 3 hours every day of his life.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, travels the world doing card tricks. How'd you like to do that for a living?
I would love it.
Interesting guy. And Dave, we were talking about the benefits, and you were explaining how health benefits for retired government workers is sort of now becoming a thing of the past. Is that accurate to say?
It is. Yeah, it is. And there have been additional pronouncements from the Governmental Accounting Standards Board just kind of tightening things up and requiring that governments report those obligations on their financial statements.
Yeah, but before you get to those technicalities, now, that's not going to be true for every government employee, right? There are some government employees that will have some lifetime or ongoing health benefits. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, there were employees that up until the reforms occurred had been made that promise. These benefits.
What categories of employees? Give me an example or two.
Well, they're just employees that were, as far as the state's concerned, employees that were employed before that date and time, really. And so when they came on, it's like the pension. There was a promise made. Here's the benefit that you'll receive when you retire. And So
With respect to the medical or
the medical,
medical.
it's the same as the pension in that when you start working at a certain point in time, the benefits are what they are, and there are promises made that we have to deliver on at or after retirement.
So do you have a number of people out there that have been, adversely affected by the cutbacks or didn't get things that they had been promised during their service for the government?
No, not in Utah, because we will make these reforms, and so the employees coming on after the reforms, they're made
They know.
different promises, and they know they're not getting as good a deal as the other employees. That has been an issue with retirement benefits and law enforcement and fire service, where those reforms that were made previously, you've got your newer employees that recognize that they don't have as good a deal as some of the old timers, and that creates some complications. If you can create a system wherein there's a total benefits statement and a total benefits where employees have it tracked and reported accurately what their whole package deal is, because it's not just medical benefits, pension, and salary or compensation. It's total compensation, right?
Yeah.
And so you could have someone with a richer pension that's compensated equally with someone with a not so great pension if the not so great pension employee has a higher salary and it's higher by a high enough percentage
Sure.
to equalize and put them on equal footing with the other employee. You could work it that way, and frankly, that's the more conservative thing to do, because you're coming out of pocket right now and you're paying through compensation, and you're saying, hey, if you want a more secure retirement, take this differential
less
that
pay
we're
down.
paying you, and invest in your retirement, and you'll be fine.
Yeah. Now on the opposite side of that, I'd say you're still just it's still the same amount, right? And I could see how some people would still complain. Now, Utah had $1 billion surplus this year, I think, that they were looking to see what to do with. And so you could make an argument that we're overtaxed already, right? And that what do we do with that $1 billion surplus?
You could, and I have fairly little, believe it or not, to do with the budget. So
Okay.
once we handle public money, once it's come in hand, we're not the tax collector, we're not the tax commission, and we don't do much with the budget. We just handle all the banking activities of the state. We contract with banks for services that are used by state agencies. Once the money comes in the door, we're investing it. We're managing it. We're moving it around to make sure that we optimize its use, managing that cash and maximizing the return prudently.
So are you a politician?
I'm an elected official.
An elected official. Good answer.
I don't know that I'm a very good politician,
But you run for office as state treasurer.
That's
correct?
right. It's a statewide elected office. It's one of 5 constitutional offices. You have governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, auditor, and treasurer.
Okay, and I think a lot of people don't know exactly what does the treasurer do. Sum it up for me. I know you've spoken at length already, but we're at the rush hour. There's a few more people turning on their radio. What is it that you do?
Yeah, in the state constitution, the treasurer is the custodian of public monies, and that's all it says. There are other provisions in statutes that define what I do, but what I do functionally is, again, I'm the banker of the state. I arrange with all of the banks in all the banking services that are used by state agencies. We do a number of, we manage a number of investments, most significantly the $16 billion state investment pool. And when the legislature authorizes bonds for infrastructure, like our new prison or for highway construction, we go out and hire the attorneys and the investment bankers, and we go out and quarterback those transactions, issue the bonds to raise the money for infrastructure. And then also I have an unclaimed property division of the state that gets a hold of lost money that people lose track
Did you
of.
make a call at the break to see if I have anything there?
I haven't checked for you yet. I'm
No?
sorry.
Okay.
No.
Well, you can check tomorrow morning. I'll be patient.
We need to work on that.
And how does that work? That lost abandoned property?
So we refer to them as holders. So businesses typically that have money. Maybe I'm RC Willie, and I mailed you a rebate check, and it never got to you in the mail, or it got to you, but it got lost in the shuffle and thrown in the garbage somehow. after a certain amount of time, I notice you never cashed that check. I'm not sure where you live now. I'm going to send that money to the state and let them figure out where you are.
Really, you can track that kind of thing, even a rebate check?
Mm-hmm. And that money gets sent to us at the state. They send us the money, and then whatever associated information they have on you, name, address, maybe social security number, and then it's our job to make those properties available online so you can search under your name. And I tell people 1 in 5 Utahns have lost properties.
Really? What website is that?
It's mycash.utah.gov. And I tell people, if you go on for 15 or 20 minutes and just think about family members, friends, businesses that you know, coworkers, neighbors, etc., if you take 15 or 20 minutes, you can probably find someone that you know that has something out there. And we don't want your money. Our job is to get your money back to you. Every year we take in between $30 and $50 million, and we pay out about $24 million.
$30 to $50 million of unclaimed property?
Just coming in. And as hard as we try to get it back to the rightful owner, we cannot keep up with how much is coming in.
Tell us that website again. I'm sure people would like to hear it again.
You bet. It's mycash.utah.gov. And once you've searched, if you find that it appears that we have something that looks like it might match based on address, whatever, you initiate the claim right there online. It's a secure website, so if we're asking for you to give us your social security number or upload some documents electronically, feel secure. It's a secure site. It's fully encrypted.
Okay, good. I can hear the people clicking at their computers right now.
That's excellent. We need to get that money out the door. I like to tell people I'm from the government and I don't want your money.
Yeah, interesting. Back to running for office. Now, you were explaining to me before the show that you're not an employee of the state of Utah.
Sure.
Is that right? I thought you said you had you were independent from the state. I thought you told me.
Well, no, I'm an employee of the state.
Still employed by the state.
Sure.
So how is your office?
Well, I'm independent in that I'm an independent constitutional officer. I don't work for the governor per se.
You are one of the 5.
The attorney general is independent. The auditor is independent. The treasurer is independent.
Okay.
We all work together, but we all have our own offices and administrations and policies. And
so who can fire you?
The voters.
Can you be impeached?
I don't know.
Okay, let's not worry about that right now. And how did you get? Well, let's back up to your career when you got out of. You graduated with a degree in finance back in 1990, and then you went to work for U.S. Bank.
Correct.
What did you do for U.S. Bank?
I was in a management development program for a couple of years where we did everything. We did consumer lending, corporate lending, human resources, treasury management. Kind of jetting back and forth between Seattle and Portland for a couple of years, and then I was a retail branch manager in Seattle. That's when I met Chris Cornell. I was a manager of a branch in the Denny Regrade, which is just up the hill from Belltown, the birth town of grunge.
And for our listeners, Chris Cornell.
Chris Cornell, he was a lead singer for Soundgarden and for Audioslave. And he did some solo work too, I think. And
you and I chatted about this last week, so we're going to segue off the U.S. Bank was boring. Let's talk about Chris Cornell. And how did you know him? He's now passed away.
Yeah, he has tragically committed suicide. He and his wife were clients of mine, and I didn't know them
in Seattle.
And we spent some time together. I took him out to dinner one night, and I asked him all those dumb questions you want to ask rock stars about what comes first, the lyrics or the music, and things like that, and talked about his musical influences and what have you. And I actually learned some really interesting things.
We're going back to Salt Lake City. It's Talk with Ted number 25. Can we trust Dave with our big money? And I've got with me Utah State Treasurer Dave Damschen, and we're talking rock and roll, little sports, little growing up, Coast Guard. I'm going to do a little pitch for myself. You know, I'm a lawyer here in town. I'm a personal injury civil rights lawyer, and I got an office at 405 South Main Street, same block as the Matheson Courthouse, and I do a show with Mark Shurtleff on Thursdays called Common Ground, and Mark is the conservative from Utah, now leaning left, and I'm the liberal hippie from New York, Vermont, now leaning a bit right.
Meeting in the middle.
And Mark and I will be on Thursday at 4 o'clock. We usually take a bunch of calls and discuss sort of the issue of the day. On this program, I like to do a little bit more personal interview. I've had some interesting people on. A professor up at the University of Utah, a cancer survivor. I had Utah State Senator Todd Weiler, now with the law firm of Christensen and Jensen. I'm giving them a couple of plugs. They ought to write me a thank you card. But I love the lawyers over there. Good law firm. And living in Utah has made me more conservative, especially more fiscally conservative, because I look around at this place. I go in and out of the courthouses, including the new one down in Provo, the 4th District Court in Provo, and it's a beautiful facility. We have incredible public facilities in this state. I go back to New York, it doesn't look quite the same, including recreational facilities in the state, town community centers with pools and great facilities, not to mention the Olympic facilities and then the natural ones that we've got, the cliffs and the mountains and the gorges. And, but we're fortunate to live in such a great industrious place, and I'm speaking with Utah State Treasurer Dave Damschen, and I've been mistaken about a few things, but I want to get back to a little bit of the rock and roll. You were talking about Chris Cornell, and how you got to know him, the lead singer of Soundgarden, one of the most influential bands of the 1990s. It was Pearl Jam and what was the other big one? I'm drawing
Alice
a blank.
in Chains.
Alice in Chains,
Yeah.
and it was the Seattle grunge scene.
Yep, and Nirvana.
Nirvana, that's what
Yeah.
I was thinking of. Yep, Nirvana. Kurt Cobain tragically died many years ago now. But Chris Cornell died from a drug overdose. Did he commit suicide?
He committed suicide. They say that there was, initially his wife was blaming the drug Ativan because it was I guess it's some sort of an anxiety med, and at certain levels it can give you suicidal thoughts. It's one of the side effects. But I was just looking at that recently. The levels of Ativan in his system weren't at that high level that had been associated with suicide or suicidal thoughts. He had a number of things in his system. He had some struggles with sobriety, and I think that at one point his wife kind of backed down, and rather than trying to make a case against a particular manufacturer or doctor or whatever and trying to pin it on one particular medication, I think it was part of his struggle with sobriety really that did him in. And I suspect if he had been sober that night, and I don't know exactly what what drug might have done it, but I think he probably would have been fine. He was very much a regular guy. He was a family man. He was.
When was it that you got to know him? Was it back in the prime of the 1990s?
Yeah, I knew him and his wife Susan Silver. His ex-wife Susan Silver. She was the manager of Soundgarden, and she co-managed Alice in Chains with Kelly Curtis, and then Kelly Curtis co-managed Alice in Chains, and Kelly Curtis was the sole manager of Pearl Jam. So there's these connections at the management level with those bands. So I got to know Chris and his wife Susan in 1991,
So
92.
you were in your
timeframe.
mid-20s working as a banker?
Yep. I was
Right.
retail branch manager.
That's
and,
totally cool.
yeah, it was
Did you
interesting.
hang out with him personally? Did you?
No, I took him out to dinner one time because I had I was a retail branch manager, so I had this huge expense account. I probably blew my whole expense account on one dinner with Chris Cornell. And
Is that right?
at
Popping
Mom.
bottles of vodka and smashing televisions, and isn't that what the rock stars do?
Well, we went to a place called Mama's Mexican Kitchen and had Mexican food. It was really it wasn't a very fancy thing.
Oh, but that's totally cool. Was
We
he,
were talking Rush earlier, so I asked Chris about his influences, and he mentioned that was the first band he mentioned was
Is that
Rush,
right?
and I was really impressed with his good taste in music when he said that. And then the other thing that was interesting, I know I mentioned earlier too, that I asked Susan and Chris what they were listening to at that moment in time, and they mentioned Ministry and Rage Against the Machine, and I look back on that now, and as you know, Chris ended up joining up with the drummer, bass player, and guitarist from Rage Against the Machine, and that's what formed Audioslave. And Chris was the front man for Audioslave for a number of years, and so I look back and think that was interesting. I got that little hint at what was to come.
That's awesome.
The other thing, I got another hint at what was to come because over dinner he described for me being asked by Alice Cooper to come down to Arizona and write some music for Alice. And he mentioned that Alice, I guess, is a big golfer, and he coaches his kids' baseball team and all that. He's just like a
Ordinary guy, Alice Cooper. He's an ordinary guy after all.
That's what I've heard about him.
Summer,
I don't know what you've heard about him, but this Chris was telling me he's just like he's just a great dad and involved in his community and what have you. So he went down there and wrote some music for Alice. And so about a year and a half later, I had moved back to Boise, had the radio on, and the DJ was saying, "Hey, we have a new one here. We have a new one here for you from Alice Cooper. This one is called blah blah blah, written by Chris Cornell." And I said, "I knew this was coming."
That's awesome.
I heard all about this like a year and a half ago from Chris Cornell. He told me this was coming. So that was.
I've got a similar one. When I was in law school, I had a friend, and I went to law school in Vermont, and I graduated from college in 1989, and the jam band Phish. Kind of the Grateful Dead of the 90s and 2000s, but the band Phish, where they were from Vermont, there were actually a handful of them from New Jersey, and they met in Vermont at the University of Vermont, and they played at Skidmore and bars when we were kids or when we were in college, and now, of course, they're big rock stars. And I actually got an album before it was released because a friend of mine took care of Paige, I think his name was McConnell, and would take care of his apartment when they went on the road. And so as a little thank you for that, I can take care of the apartment, but I got a CD before it was released. So that was cool.
That's really cool.
I was the coolest kid in law school at that time.
That's really cool.
And I was a big Deadhead back in the day. You ever followed the Grateful Dead?
Not so much.
Never got into the Dead.
Not my thing, no.
No? So in my car, you go into my car and you got satellite radio. I've got the Ozzy Osbourne metal station.
Ozzy's Boneyard.
Ozzy's Boneyard.
I have that too.
Ozzy's Boneyard. And,
don't tell Utah voters.
And it's not as bad as it sounds. So much of the heavy metal is about salvation, and I've said many times everything's sort of got two meanings. And do you know the original song from Black Sabbath? Black Sabbath came out in 1970 in the hippie era, and it was Ozzy Osbourne out of England. And the key that they played the first song in, the name of the album was Black Sabbath. The band is Black Sabbath, and the song is Black Sabbath. And it starts with rain and church bells, and it's very dark sounding. And it's in the key, it might be D flat or... but I learned on Ozzy radio the other day that key was outlawed in churches in the 17th century because it's the demonic sound, that bong.
It was probably a minor.
Bong.
D-flat minor.
D-flat minor is, I think, what it was, yep.
Yeah.
And that was actually outlawed in the churches, that the organist couldn't play that because it was the sound of evil. And Ozzy tapped into that. But if you listen to a lot
Did you know that horns are sprouting out of your head right now?
Is that right? Yeah, they must be.
Feel it?
Yeah, they can. But a lot of that music is not quite what it seems.
No, I was... I'll range around on YouTube from time to time if I have a couple of minutes, and I was watching an interview with Ronnie James Dio, and he was talking about Holy Diver and talking about Holy Diver being a Christ figure, but it's kind of a sci-fi on another planet, but living for a lot of the same purposes as Jesus. And
Ronnie James Dio, for the listeners, when Ozzy Osbourne went solo back in about 1981 or 82 with the great Randy Rhoads, Black Sabbath continued on and had a substitute singer, Ronnie James Dio. Mm-hmm. So Ronnie James Dio was also a lead singer for Black Sabbath.
Yep. Now,
he died a few years ago.
You might kick me out of here for admitting this, but I was kind of into Stryper for a while. Have you heard of them?
I have.
Oh, I'm impressed that you've heard of them. A lot of people really disrespect me for saying that I ever liked them, but I actually saw them in concert in San Francisco. Around the same time I saw Ozzy, actually. I saw Metallica open for Ozzy and just about got trampled. And the Metallica fans were a lot more energetic than the Ozzy fans, and that was 1987, I want to say.
Right? Now, I saw Ozzy Osbourne here at the, what's the outdoor facility that here? USANA.
Yeah, USANA Amphitheater.
Just a couple of years ago. Great concert. But I think Ozzy did his last tour here just last year.
Yeah.
But Ozzy still resonates with a lot of middle-aged guys. That's for sure. Yeah. And, he's in recovery, Ozzy Osbourne.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Yeah. Let's get back to some business, Dave. You were telling me earlier, I want to talk about charter schools. I always have more information. We're burning through the hour here. I want to talk about the charter schools, and because we've got some charter schools here in Utah. And charter schools are still funded publicly,
Yep.
right? But I don't quite understand how they get set up, but they give a little bit of more autonomy maybe to groups of people in control, or an alternative to the public school system. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah. What we want is choice in education, and I think charter schools offer that to a large degree. There are so many different methodologies and pedagogies and styles that charter schools can bring forth, and so they do add to choice. So I think that where they need flexibility is with curriculum and educational programming, but to the extent that they're pretty much fully funded by taxpayer funds.
Still funded by taxpayer funds. It almost, to me, feels like my daughter went to Weileman up in Park City, which is right there near the sledding park as you come up over Parley Summit on your right. And it's 1st through 8th grade, and she went there for 5 years. And it almost felt like a private public school.
Yeah.
Kind of like an alternative public school. And it had its pros and cons, but we've had some experience with charter schools.
Yeah, I tell people that charter schools are not a silver bullet per se. To the extent that they offer more options to parents and their children, they're good. To the extent that they're a little bit more nimble in constructing, they've been a nice shock absorber against the enrollment growth that we have going on here in Utah. It's a lot easier to get a charter school in place, easier and quicker to get a charter school in place. And I've heard that.
Then to expand a school or build new schools?
Then to build a traditional public school.
Why is that if they're both funded by the same money?
Well, with charter schools, the model is typically those that are seeking a charter will work with a developer who will build the facility for them, and they'll lease it to the school for a number of years. And then once the school is well enough established to be able to have bonds issued for it, then the school will have bonds issued, and they'll take the proceeds from that bond issue, buy the school away from the developer, and now they're making bond payments.
So there's a unique financial incentive.
Right, and it's there's an incentive for developers to, if they're comfortable with the charter school operator, to make that investment in developing the land and turning a nice profit when they sell the land. And but like I said,
are there tax incentive developments for developers?
I don't think so.
So it's just a practical incentive.
It is, yeah. It's really just the it's really just the gains that well, obviously there's an income element, from the lease payments, and then the gains that can be made from the sale of the property.
Okay. You were involved in some issue with the charter school that reached the press about some controversy. Was it some funding that a school did outside of the available means that were here in Utah?
Yeah, what started that is I went to the State Board of Education. I believe strongly that to serve my constituents, I should work constructively and openly with the governor, with the State Board of Education, with the legislature. And part of that is keeping open channels of communication, keeping people informed. And what we do in the area of charter school finance is a little bit arcane, a little bit under the radar, and that's fine, especially when things are being handled efficiently and effectively and things aren't blowing up. We're not capturing headlines. But I chair of the boards and commissions that I serve on. I chair the Utah Charter School Finance Authority. And the authority is what's called a conduit issuer of municipal bonds. A charter school, being a 501c3, cannot issue tax-exempt municipal bonds. They have to use a governmental entity to issue the bonds on their behalf. So a city or a county can be a conduit issuer. And frankly, before the creation of the authority, that's how it worked. The charter school would they would go to their city or county.
The city or county that would
have them issue the bonds. At one point, the legislature said, hey, let's have a kind of a go-to state level conduit issuer established that can create some, scale efficiencies and so forth.
Can I ask you a stupid question? Do they all need this bonding at their inception?
They really can't have bonds issued on their behalf at
And
inception.
so that's why you've got the developer first.
Yeah, there's not a market there. There are no investors out there that are willing to take that kind of risk.
Okay.
But once the charter school has been in operation for at least a couple of years, and when the economy was bad, as a charter school, you needed to be in operation for 3 or 4 or 5 years. Now that the economy is strong, investors will come in and they'll play. If the school's been successfully in operation, they're financially sound, the academic performance is adequate, investors will come in at the 2-year mark even at this point and take a look at buying those bonds. So we're a conduit
the purpose
issuer.
for the bonding typically is what? To get that then financial freedom from the developer?
Yeah, we'll issue the bonds, and the money from the bond issue is used to buy the school from the developer.
Okay.
And so,
Because otherwise the day-to-day operations would just be funded with the same tax basis as any other school.
and that's the thing, is their funding has to not only fund operations but pay for the bonds as well. So, and it works for most of them.
Okay.
Yeah. So I had gone to the State Board of Education to report to them on a couple of things. One was that we don't really have a system for working out charter schools that are failing, that have issued bonds that are not backed by the state. We're diving a little deeply here.
Okay.
Some of these charter school bonds are backed by the state under a credit enhancement program. Under the credit enhancement program, we do have a mechanism in place to work out failing or troubled charter schools. But if they're not credit enhanced, we don't. So I was reporting to the state board on that and another issue. And the other issue had to do with use of a conduit issuer out of state.
Out of state. You're going to tell us why you had a problem with that as the Utah State Treasurer when we get back.
Happy to.
Ted McBride, a lawyer here in Salt Lake City, transplanted New Yorker. Shout out to my friends back home in New York and New England. And I'm with Dave Damschen, the Utah State Treasurer. And Dave, the time just flies on this program, and we'll just be able to really kind of scratch the surface. But I hope that people are getting a little better idea of what you do as state treasurer and the issues that you face. And you're telling us a story about a charter school that got raised some bonds, was it? Bond money going outside of state? And why don't you break that down for us?
Yeah, it's not uncommon for the governing board of a charter school to not be highly sophisticated with municipal bonds and things like that, right? And so a lot of times they're a little bit dependent on the financial professionals they come into contact with. And there are professionals out there that are registered and licensed and regulated, and for the most part, charter schools are well served in Utah. When they come to the Utah Charter School Finance
I
Authority,
can sense your reservation. Some people also just make mistakes, right? Do you think that they might have been got some bad advice? Is that what you're kind of alluding to?
yeah,
Okay.
that argument could be made. Yeah.
Okay.
So we found out after the fact that a school went and used a conduit in Arizona for financing, and we broke down the fees.
Was it a municipality? Because when you said conduit before, I thought you were talking that the conduits
They have to be
available to the
governmental.
charter
Yeah, so
schools
it's
here in Utah have to be governmental.
Yeah, and I don't know a lot about what the entity was, but it was a conduit issuer in Arizona.
Okay.
And so they went down there, and we got a hold of the detail on the fees that were paid, and they were really high. And they were fees that would never be charged here in Utah, because one of the things that we do as a board of the Utah Charter School Finance Authority is try to hold the professionals accountable for fair and competitive fees across the board, and these fees were quite high. And so I used some strong language when I was talking to the State Board of Education to describe those fees. And so Chris Jones picked up on that, ran a story on it.
And that's
I have to watch my choice of words as an elected official. I'm
Yeah.
learning. So there were no swear words involved, but I used really strong words. So
And what was your principal concern with it? Just that they were paying more than they needed to?
yes, these are taxpayer dollars, and there's a reason why we have procurement code and why requests for proposal and bids and things like that have to be
Because
done
then
to
it's
make
going to
sure.
be the taxpayer monies then they're going to go to pay those obligations.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so we just want to make sure that we see the charter schools treated fairly and professionally in all cases, and that there's competitive bidding, and that we're letting a strong free market come to play, but to compete in a fair and transparent in a way. So anyway, that was just one deal.
One of the issues.
We do like 5 to 10 charter school transactions a year, and I think that in Utah we're very well served by charter schools. They're now handling about 15% of the total enrollment in our public school system. They're a very important part of our public education system in Utah.
And they go from grammar school right up through high school?
Yeah, there are charter high schools. Charter high schools tend to struggle a little bit. I think if you have to have a strong stomach and really know what you're doing to run a successful charter high school. But in the K-9 arena, boy, charter school.
Why do you think that is? What do you attribute the difference to?
I think think about kids when they're high school age. They want to be with their friends. They want to play sports. I don't know, but I think that's a lot of it. It's just hard to have the fit. The ones that are most successful are the ones, as far as I can tell, that have college prep focus, or that are maybe associated with higher education institutions, like New Ames up in Davis County. Those tend to be very successful. Summit Academy High School is doing a good job. There's a number of
where is Summit Academy?
It's in Draper.
In Draper, okay, so it's not Summit County.
No, Summit Academy. But my wife and I had a foster daughter for about 5 months last year. We had to hang it up. We were unable to hang in there and deal with all the issues that she had going on. She was 13, so the issues were extensive, and we tried. But she was very artistic, and we live up in Layton, and one of the best charter schools in the state is Syracuse Arts Academy. And we were thankful that school was there and that it was an option, because for kids like her that hey, this is really a tailored program, and it's really, really going to work well for certain students. There's the East Hollywood High School that has very custom tailored programming that's really going to work for certain kids, and it's not always the college bound. Different kids have different needs.
Sure.
And that's the beautiful thing about charter schools, is they can be very nimble and flexible in what they put forth.
Oh, interesting. And I could see maybe that growing more in the future, some more like specialized high schools instead of just the standard prep to get you to college, which college isn't for everyone.
No, that's really true.
I always felt that even back in my time in the early 80s, I'm a mechanical idiot. I can't fix a broken ballpoint pen. But I always felt like there should have been more emphasis on even some basic auto mechanics classes so that you understand the workings of an engine, because any one of us could be riding around, in your car breakdown, as well as some emphasis even on cooking and home economics. And I know I could have taken that. We had that, but I didn't do enough of that because I'm a terrible cook.
Well, it's interesting. I rebuilt the carburetor, and I've worked on brakes, and I've done some light duty stuff. I've never rebuilt an engine or anything like that. But with the way cars are now, they're so heavily computerized.
Now it's all computers.
You sort of do need a college degree to even work on the car.
Yeah.
It's so technical. And so while it used to be, I think it's still fun
my
to go
curriculum not as compelling as I thought it was back in the 80s, but I felt like I could have benefited from something like that. Something.
Oh
more
yeah, and
mechanical.
there are a lot of things you can do with a car that are somewhat less technical. But I think it's probably most fun to go out and turn a wrench now with an older vehicle that doesn't have all the computerized doodads.
Speaking of cars, Teslas. I think Tesla is an interesting company with some interesting technology. I don't think it's the answer to global warming, et cetera. But I've got some issues with the tax breaks that are provided to Tesla, the company, as well as owners. And I see that some of those tax incentives to buy those vehicles are being phased out. There was some question whether they would be extended, but a tax credit, I think it is up to as much as $7,500 for somebody that could afford to buy a Tesla, right?
Right.
And so I just find the whole thing a little bit elitist, the tax breaks at those levels, but they're they've now reduced those incentives, and they might be phasing them out. And at the time they announced that, Tesla announced that they'd be selling some of their cars for $2,000 less. So, but I'm skeptical of Tesla, but I understand the role that the government tries to play in creating financial incentives to...
You mean picking winners and losers?
Well, perhaps that's it. And I just have I've had a bit of a problem with Tesla. Everything's got two sides. It's good. They're nice cars. They're faster than mine. They've got unique engines with that electric engine, and I wish them well. But I just have a little bit of problem with all those tax incentives to that one company that really caters to a market that's a pretty wealthy market that can afford a Tesla. Are you involved in any policy making things like that, where you're trying to shape policy or drive financial incentive, or is it more just when the money comes over to you, you're managing it?
I get involved in public policy issues, but not much tax policy. And when it comes to those kinds of incentives, those are driven by industries typically with special interests. I don't get involved in that at all.
Yeah. So when you say public policy, then what do you get involved in?
Things that aren't very interesting to talk about. Investment policy of public funds. There was a bill this past session that I really disliked that removed much needed accountability and transparency and oversight over the administration of certain type of public funds, that I worked against the bill and was happy to see it fail.
What were your concerns there?
Well, this is one of the boards that I serve on oversees grants and loans made to rural communities impacted by extractive industries. And the board, as
the mining industries?
Mining, oil, gas. And the board, as it's composed right now, is very well composed. It has the right kind of people on the board, the right kind of representation, the right kind of oversight. And there were certain special interests that didn't like the scrutiny and the oversight that was coming into play. And so the bill originally completely remade the board. And then it also took a certain funds flow to a local intergovernmental entity that is currently has strings attached and has oversight over it. And this bill, it did two things originally. It remade the board, took off all the people that were asking hard questions.
Skeptical already.
Yeah, and then it automated an appropriation of funds to this entity that really needed the oversight. So the remaking of the board was extremely unpopular. The bill was substituted, so the remaking of the board was taken out, but it still automated this appropriations that really needs oversight and control. And so I get involved in things like that, where if I think it's a clear right, wrong, defense of the taxpayer kind of thing, I'll jump in. But I try to be really careful about, knowing my wheelhouse, knowing where I belong and where I don't belong policy-wise.
Yeah.
And so...
now, how many times have you run for office?
Once.
When are you up again?
I was appointed in 2016, appointed in 2015, ran for re-election in 2016. So I'd be up next year.
Now, how is it how is it that you were appointed?
So my predecessor, I was chief deputy treasurer for 7 years and worked for Treasurer Richard Ellis, who was a fabulous state treasurer. And he resigned his office at the end of 2015. He took a position with the Utah Educational Savings Plan. And
so uniquely, you took that position without being elected for the first time.
Right. I was acting treasurer for a number of weeks, and I sought appointment and was appointed by the governor in December of 2015. And having never run for nor held an elected office of any kind in my life, ran for re-election in 2016 on a statewide campaign. And
how was that? How does that compare to like a senator's campaign? Were you out there knocking on doors and raising money?
No.
That sounds like the kind of politician I'd want to be.
No, I had to really kind of try to get to know members of the state central committee, the Republican Party first and foremost, because that's your first step, is to work with them. And then they pass 3 names to the governor, and the governor appoints. And so in 2016, it's really just a matter of trying to get the word out to state delegates in the Republican Party up through the convention. I did have an opponent in the convention, And
So there's like a primary,
I got 84% at convention, so thankfully there was no primary.
but okay, at convention, were you up against other Republicans?
Yeah, Merrill Cook went
Okay.
to convention.
Okay.
Yep.
Are you going to run again for re-election?
Likely.
Okay.
I haven't decided for sure, but yeah, there's a really good chance.
Okay. If you do, I'll have you back on. If you need to update the public on the fine job that you've done. You know, when I go back home to New York, I carry on about the good hands that this state is in. It's a well-managed place. It's a well-funded place, too, but a well-managed place. And we're lucky to have people like you managing our assets. Now, you talked earlier about the Lost Property Fund, and during a break, Alan Anderson here logged onto that website. Let's tell us that website again.
Oh, yeah. It's mycash.utah.gov.
And that's for
mycash.utah.gov.
unclaimed property. And Alan, is your mic working?
It is. And I found.
Tell us what you
I
did.
found 3 different claims for myself,
Right.
each over $250.
And, you know, over 250 could be 1,000. It could be a lot more than 250.
Oh, it's
so
just giving them a minimum?
yeah, we don't put out there like the total. There's a cottage industry called Fee Finders. And they want to
take
insert
a
themselves
cut.
between you and my agency
Right.
and charge you a fee.
Right.
We don't charge a fee. So if you're ever looking to claim your lost properties and you're dealing with somebody talking about a fee, you're not dealing with the government. Redirect
Yeah,
and
this
come directly to
isn't a
us.
trick where they're trying to get people on old outstanding warrants where they say, hey, you want a free pizza,
No.
come show up.
No.
Because Alan Anderson could have a couple of old warrants out for him. I noticed
No,
that.
I should have done a warrant search first.
Yeah, you should have. But I think we can trust Dave here. But Dave, I think we answered the question. Can we trust Dave with our big money? It's great to meet another Rush fan, diehard skier, somebody that loves Utah, and I will feel more confident going to bed tonight knowing that our financial security is partially in your hands.
You're
So,
very kind. Thank you.
Thanks for coming on. Talk with Ted. Thanks for listening, folks. I'll be on Thursday with Mark Shurtleff, Common Ground, 4 to 6, and you'll hear from me then. Go Jazz. There's a game tonight. Thanks for listening.